Welcome to AntArctic Stories, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes into the rich world of people who live, work, and undertake daring expeditions in the polar regions. My name is Heather Thorkelson, and I'll be your host today. Sarah Lurcock is the South Georgia Heritage Trust Director on South Georgia. Sarah is responsible for overseeing all of the South Georgia Heritage Trust operations and staff on South Georgia, including the operation, management, and upkeep of the museum. Sarah studied biology at university and has lived and worked on South Georgia in various roles for more than 20 years. In this time, she's developed an in-depth knowledge of the island's heritage and natural history, and been involved in a variety of projects, including the refurbishment of the whalers' cemeteries and Grytviken church, fieldwork on plants and animals, and the translocation of reindeer to the Falkland Islands. Sarah has a particular interest in the social history of South Georgia and general history of the Antarctic region. She is employed part-time and works on the island for 6 months of the year, and in the UK the rest of the time. Sarah Lurcock, welcome to AntArctic Stories.
Hello, Heather. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's so nice to be speaking with you today.
Yes, a slightly different forum for us. We're normally meeting on the island.
Yes, absolutely, in Grytviken. So it's really exciting to have a little bit more time today to talk about your work there, what brought you there, etc. I just want to paint a bit of a picture for folks listening who perhaps haven't heard of South Georgia, or they've heard of it, but they're not really aware of what this very special place is. So South Georgia is an island in the South Atlantic covered in towering peaks and glaciers that lead down to these shores that are covered in hundreds of thousands of king penguins, large harems of elephant seals, fur seals, various species of birds. It's a very special place. It is literally a place you've seen in David Attenborough specials. It's so remote that it's only accessible by ship, and it is considered a highlight on Antarctic expedition cruises that take the long route down south and stop over there for a few days to explore her shores. Now, Sarah, you live in the main settlement there for half of the year. And I'm curious, what year did you first come down to South Georgia, and what was it that brought you to this extremely special and remote island in the first place?
Well, the very first touch was at the end of the 1980s. My husband and I were working in the Falkland Islands at the time, and my husband, Pat, he had already worked with the British Antarctic Survey, so his work had taken him travelling down through the island, and I think it caught him straight away. We always say people who come to South Georgia, most of them end up with what we call the bug. And it just means you have to get back to the island. I think, Heather, you've got it. I definitely got it. So that first touch, just a quick visit with a Royal Fleet Auxiliary vessel. And then it became a little bit of a mission for both Pat and I to find a way to spend time on the island. And we were lucky over the years. We made the contacts necessary. Pat got a job on the island actually as a single man, so I didn't even get to go with him the first time. Then he was allowed for me to come and visit him because he would be doing like a 4-month contract. And I think the third time he took a contract, I just went with him. I was very lucky because when we started all of this, life was very different. There was a perception that women couldn't be on the island. Now, of course, in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, there were families there, but this was a new time, Following the invasion in 1982, the British presence on the island had been a military garrison. And in those days, there really weren't many women in the military. And so, yes, it was just like, an all-man world, and somehow it was going to be really difficult. But I was lucky that another couple turned up in South Georgia. They were my predecessors working at the South Georgia Museum. Their names were Tim and Pauline Carr. And they had their very own boat, so they could live on the island away from the garrison. And of course, there was a woman and the world didn't stop. So it became easier then for me to come down and join Pat. And then that was it. That was me set there.
Amazing. And so that then evolved eventually into you becoming the director of the South Georgia Heritage Trust on South Georgia. How did that transition happen?
Well, when you're on South Georgia, my husband had a job, but I was used to working. And so you're just looking around for any work. And, really anything that came my way, I was likely to do. So I did such a variety of things. I've trained as a biologist. So I was very happy to do field work for scientists who couldn't reach the island. And then just supporting my husband in his work, because he was a one-man band representing the government on the island. So I'd just help him out in the office, get him the occasional day off and so on. And I ended up taking over the post office role from him. It was part of his job. But I did that for quite a number of years, and actually it was pretty samey. And the job came up with the museum, and I just thought, well, this sort of job isn't going to come up very often. I don't think they'll want me, but I'll apply and we'll see what happens. And you could have knocked me down with a feather when they actually appointed me.
Oh, that's amazing. And I mean, having been there today and seeing how developed it is and how robust and amazing it is, it's so interesting to imagine what it would have been like to be there in the early days at the inception prior to what currently existing. And to be honest, I'm not totally surprised that they picked you, because you were someone who had already shown so much love and dedication to the place. I mean, here you are showing up and saying, just give me something to do, I'll do it. and that's kind of, I feel like the initiative that's required by people who are going to work and live in a place like this, Yeah,
it's really, I always warn people, a lot of people think they would like to do it, but the reality of living and working in such a remote place is really not for everybody. But if it suits you, there are a few of us. And then you end up like me, having been down there a heck of a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So these days, you're responsible for managing quite a production. There's a number of different working pieces during the 6 months that you're there. You've got a team of museum staff, which includes gift shop staff, the occasional curatorial intern, an artist in residence, a fundraising assistant. Prior to actually getting to the island, what kind of prep work is required of you in the off-season when you're in the UK?
Yeah, there's a lot that we don't get to. The tourism is a growing industry in the southern region. So we've really noticed the last few years we don't get to do everything we'd like to do. So anything that can be put off until the off-season. I'm also very lucky. I'm in a part-time role. So I can work for 3 months out of the 6 that I'm off the island, and that suits me because, I really enjoy having the time off. But actually, I'm still involved, and I can just tick away. So there's all the things like recruitment, a little bit of training, all the trustees meetings, report writing, ordering everything that we need for the following season. And these are some of these things you simply can't do just because of technology. You can't actually do them from the island. And also meeting other colleagues. And I really love the contrast. Now, there is a really important advance that we've made in our staffing that I'm really excited to tell you about. From this year, we've got a full-time curator at the museum again. So
that's great.
Just recruited somebody who will join us in September on a full-time contract. And for the museum, this is a really important step forward. So I'm absolutely thrilled with that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I wonder, do you get, because there are so many people coming through South Georgia, both expedition staff like myself and guests and people who just fall completely in love with the place, when you advertise for the roles, that are required in Grytviken every year, do you get inundated with different people's CVs that want to come down, or what's that process like?
I think it's a danger. So we are lucky that we make enough contacts that some of our jobs aren't advertised. And we do know, for instance, we have an organisation we work closely with, the UK AHT, the Antarctic Heritage Trust. who run Port Lockroy, sort of a similar setup on a small island off the Antarctic Peninsula. And I know that one year they had a really lovely documentary about their little museum and the post office they run there. And the following year, they had just so many applicants. It must have been hard for a small organisation to deal with. So for us, the museum assistant roles will take 2 people in that role. And we don't actually advertise that. We have enough people either travelling through the island, maybe staff off the cruise ships, people who've heard through other ways, and they contact us, and we will have enough people that will get the right staff that way. Obviously, for the curatorial role, that's very different because we're looking for someone highly specialised. So that was properly advertised. And the only job that gets advertised on a regular basis is the fundraising assistant role. So there's a couple of charity websites and an environment website that will pop that on. And again, we'll get plenty of applicants for that.
I bet. And yeah, anyone who has had any experience or knowledge of South Georgia, I think, as you said earlier, you need to be a special type of person to want to stay there for a length of time because it is such a different life and you are so cut off. But for the right people, I can imagine the draw must be quite something.
Yeah, I think that's
so
true.
Given that for much of the season, while you're there, you're receiving up to 2 passenger vessels per day, right? So we're looking at usually 100 people plus per vessel. That's a lot of traffic coming through Grytviken, through the museum, through the gift shop. Can you give us a snapshot of what you and your staff's day-to-day life is like in Grytviken?
Yeah, it's either a ship day or it's not a ship day. So really how we spend our day completely depends on whether a cruise ship is arriving. And we're getting around 80 cruise ship vessels visiting Grytviken each season at the moment, and it's growing. So on a cruise ship day, and as you say, it might be a 2 cruise ship day, we might be up at 7 o'clock in the morning, jumping on a Zodiac, the little inflatable boats, ready to go out, start telling the people who are going to land about what we're offering on the island and what they're going to see in the whaling station, and tell them about the tours that we run and so on. And we also ask them to help our charity, because without all of those people sort of supporting us, actually we wouldn't be able to do all the things we do on the island. So from there, we will land straight back to the museum. They often will be landing their passengers then to Shackleton's grave, which is a little bit further round what we call the cove from where the museum is sited. And we might then go out and meet them over there, lead in some tour groups explaining the whaling heritage to groups of passengers. Then they may stay on shore 3-4 hours. So we're obviously operating the museum and the gift shop for them. Once the ship is done, everybody, all the tourists will go back to their ship again on the little inflatable boats. And if we've got another ship coming, well, we hit the dustpans and brushes. We race around, we clean the public loos, we stock up the shop, we grab some lunch, and then we do it all over again.
Oh my gosh.
If it's not a ship day, though, then we need to get into the core work, all the things that need done. So this may be things like maintaining the artifacts, particularly those that live outside. We've got great big artifacts like tripods, sealers' tripods, masts, big bits of whaling equipment. And unless we keep those in tip-top condition, you can imagine in this very extreme environment and the marine weather, they really won't thrive. So we have to keep on top of that. New exhibitions, anything like that, just sort of low-level maintenance work, anything research-wise, then all of that has to get done when there isn't a ship in. It's a tiny, tiny team. So, yeah, we've got our challenges.
Right. It's such an incredible place. And for anyone listening who hasn't been there who's been thinking about going there, in such a small area, there is so much diversity. There's the remnants of the whaling station. There's, as you say, Shackleton's grave. There's the gorgeous museum that's been curated there. There's a post office. There's a gift shop. There's hikes that you can take. I mean, it's you get, on average 4 hours there, and to be able to kind of see and take it all in, it's really something, and it's so worth it. It's definitely a highlight of being on South Georgia, because everywhere else you go, you get the wildlife, you get this kind of overwhelming sensation of being with more animals than you ever imagined. But Grytviken has a very different vibe. And I think it's so wonderful that you have this team and the South Georgia Heritage Trust that is dedicated to making it such an incredible experience for people who visit there and to learn more about the history, because you also your staff give historical walks around the old whaling station and up to the old church and that kind of thing. So it's quite a special experience. Now, where you live, and in fact the whole island, is only accessible by ship. There are no aircraft that can land there, which means that you and your team are pretty much living off provisions for the entire time that you're there. I have to ask, is there anything that you miss when you're on the island for 6 months straight?
Yeah, when I come back away from the island, I major on fruit and veg. It's not like we do without. But because the main resupplies, we have one supply of major food per year, and a lot of it, you can imagine then, is frozen, dried, tinned. But then we have our fishery patrol vessel, the government's patrol vessel, which is spending its time going around the waters of the island, protecting the fishery there. She will be coming in and out from the Falkland Islands about once every 6 weeks. And when she comes back in, she'll bring our post and a little bit of fresh fruit and vegetables. And it won't last long, but it's such a treat. Yeah. It's ridiculous to get so excited about, a butternut squash. We're also very lucky because, of course, we have worked with some of the same people on these cruise ships for years, and they know how much we appreciate the occasional bit of watermelon when we come on board their vessel. Sometimes you come on board and they kind of say, "Oh, there's a fruit plate over there for you," and or we might get given something exotic like a pineapple. But it is fresh fruit and vegetable all day long.
And similarly, these days when the whole world feels very connected technologically, back when you started in Grytviken, that was a time when I assume technology was quite limited. There was probably no internet. This is pre-internet, of course. Can you kind of paint the picture a little bit of what life was like on remote South Georgia back then in comparison to today in terms of just connectivity?
Yeah, life was a lot quieter in the sense that my husband's job, I remember he was reporting back to his employers once a week in a really short text. We had already got used to being offline. I mean, internet didn't even exist, but because of living in the Falklands where any telephone call was really, really expensive, our families and so on had already got used to us not being in touch. In fact, I would say even today, if I phone my family, they worry. They think it must be important because, why would I be phoning? So phones, even now, it's much easier these days. You can do phone over internet. But actually, I just got out of the habit, and my family don't expect much, really either. So, it's changed a lot as the years have gone on. Then we've had a satellite dome put in at King Edward Point. Through that, then email came along and the internet access, but it's very, very restricted. So it hasn't changed that much. It would be technologically impossible for us to do this if I was down on the island. We just don't have the connectivity for it. So we're still really all working remotely from our head offices, whether you're a scientist or the government or us down there, they have to kind of trust you to just get on with the job and let them know about it later.
Absolutely. And, it's funny just thinking about this because you and I have emailed at times when I've been on a ship with very limited internet and you're in Grytviken, very limited internet, and you're like, please don't send any attachments. That constant reminder of like, we've gone back in the past in time here.
Yeah.
It's not, we can't do things like usual. And there is something very refreshing, and I've spoken about this with some other guests we've had on the program who have lived, for example, on scientific bases. There's something very refreshing about not being connected all the time and not being, not having people be able to access you all the time or have sort of mindless things like social media to scroll through. It completely changes your orientation in your daily life. And it's quite refreshing, I find, to go to parts of the world where you don't have that.
Yeah, but again, I see this changing, because we've got young people coming to work with us. They are just used to having it. And we really warn them before they come down just how bad it is. But it's kind of like sometimes they don't really absorb that information, and they kind of get down there and they go, oh, okay, I can't even do my internet banking, But yeah, I would say, for social things, for instance, in particular, I always think it's almost Victorian, because you can't just put a satellite sport program up that everybody gathers to watch. You have to be a little bit more inventive and creative about social events. So you get back to the old fancy dress party and the barbecues and
that sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, you can't sit online and play, computer games with someone the other side of the world you've never met. You've got to find something different to do. So we still read books on South Georgia.
Oh, that's really neat. That's really, it's wonderful to get a glimpse into what it's like down there. And the fact that, as you say, not a ton has changed, even if it is a little bit more connected. So I'd like to switch gears for a minute, because there's some really amazing initiatives that have been going on in South Georgia, such as the removal of reindeer, which had been introduced by the Norwegian whalers in the early 20th century. And more recently, something that anyone who's traveled down to South Georgia in the past few years would be aware of, the Habitat Restoration Project, which successfully eradicated a large population of rats that were introduced to the island in the 18th century, also by whaling vessels. Now, the rats had a really catastrophic effect on South Georgia's native bird population, but the Habitat Restoration Project managed to successfully get rid of them once and for all. It was such an amazing project, obviously. Can you tell us about this groundbreaking program and what led to its success?
Well, it was years. The build up, the first idea, someone being brave enough to say, actually, this was a massive project in a remote place. And if there's one thing you can say about the charity that I represent, the South Georgia Heritage Trust, there was this group of trustees who were brave enough to actually say, you know what, we can do this. And I sometimes wonder, did they have any idea what they were really taking on? Because it was massive. It took, there was lots and lots of planning. Once they got underway, there was a trial phase where they had to get helicopters down to the island. And, absolutely key to making this work was the tourist industry. So, the helicopters, to get them down to the island, they actually got brought down on a cruise vessel that just happened to have a helicopter hangar. So, just fantastic help getting our teams in and out, and also the financing of the project. A lot of the money that came to pay for this huge project came from visitors to the island. And, it ticked away. We had, after the trial phase, we had 3 field seasons, baiting different sections of the island that were geographically separated by these massive glaciers, so that we could actually, luckily, do one bit than the other. This island is big in terms of doing this sort of work. We were so lucky that actually it was divided into these separate geographic sections, so we could do it in a phased way like that. And the final phase was only a couple of years ago now, where we then had to go back in with field teams and look everywhere to make sure every last evidence of any rodent infestation anywhere has gone. Because, the great worry was that all we could see from the immediate changes in some of the sort of quick breeding birds, you could see very quickly that the pipits, this little teeny bird that had been on the edge of extinction, was just back. Incredible changes really, really quickly. But, if there had been a little pocket of rodents left somewhere and we didn't know about it, then actually left alone, they would expand. We've got climate change, of course we have. We see the recession of the glaciers. So this means that the rodents, if unchecked, would have then just reinfested the island, and it would have been like we hadn't started. So a huge project. we're so proud of what was achieved, but it was a team effort, not just within the South Georgia Heritage Trust, but of course, so many other people had to be our working partners without the government being on side and getting our team in using their fishery patrol vessel and supporting our work. And we were working right alongside the government with some of the projects they were doing, because you mentioned the reindeer that had been introduced, a century before. If the government hadn't have eradicated the reindeer first, we couldn't have done the rodent program. So then they had to sort of do their bit first. We then came in, did the rodents, and then the government had carried on this work because there's a lot of work ongoing still with invasive plants. And of course, once the reindeer were gone, those plants have just sort of taken another life because they're not getting grazed and so on. So lots and lots of work to be done on habitat restoration for the future still.
It's just a colossal amount of work. I mean, the rat eradication, well, and the reindeer for that matter, but at least reindeer are big. You can see them, you can identify them easily, but it's much more challenging when you're thinking about things like rodents and how to get rid of them and then how to make sure that they're gone. And if I remember correctly, you had a dog team that went in, you took around to sniff out and see if they could find evidence, which I've seen a picture of these little dogs on your website, on the South Georgia Heritage Trust website. They're absolutely super cute, but also very talented, obviously. Is that now finished, that final phase of the dogs going in to check and see if there are any rodents?
So the South Georgia Heritage Trust has officially announced that this project is over. And that the island is rat-free. Okay. So yes, those dogs and the thousands of kilometres that they did all around the coastal areas checking gave us the confidence to be able to say that every last rodent had gone. Yeah, fantastic result.
Amazing. I heard somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, but that this was one of the most ambitious projects of its kind ever.
Yes, it was the largest amount of ground that has been attempted for this sort of eradication. What's been absolutely super is to see that when people could see that we were achieving this, it was giving other places the confidence to tackle some of the larger places. So if, anyone who's, say, interested in the bird species and so on may be aware of some of the other issues around the world. So Dundee, where our headquarters were, and people from around the world looking at all forms of invasive species on islands and on mainland areas all came together to talk about all their projects, learn from each other, and just a really amazing conference. And you see this work that's being done around the world in places that you would have no idea that they were capable of doing it. Really exciting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. The sharing of knowledge, and then everyone who's been involved in the habitat restoration project to date is going to be a huge resource for anyone else tackling this type of thing, as you say. And it's funny, because the first time I came to South Georgia was 2013, so not that long ago, but still in the earlier days of getting rid of the rodents. And I have to say, the last time I stepped ashore, you mentioned the pipits earlier, there were so many pipits. They were literally landing on passengers' tripods. Like, they were everywhere. It was amazing. So just in a very short span of a few years, the getting rid of the rodents, I was watching this explosion of the natural wildlife, the endemic species coming back, just an army of them. And it was amazing. And so you might go to a place that has some of these problems and think, oh, well, it's still really nice. But when you see what it could be, how it should be, when you remove anything that's not really supposed to be there, it's just a whole different level, and it makes you appreciate nature so much. So you mentioned, now that the project is complete with the rats, the rodents, there are other projects going on, such as getting rid of these invasive species of plants and whatnot. I did read as well about a project going on that is related to old sealing areas or different sealing locations, sort of a historical preservation project. And I know there's a few different other things happening as well. Can you kind of give us an overview of the other projects that are happening on South Georgia to conserve her heritage?
Yeah, South Georgia Heritage Trust now is either doing or supporting quite a wide range of really varied projects that all relate to South Georgia. And we have an interest not just in the environment of the island, but the history. Hence, we're running that museum on the island on behalf of the government. It's a really good fit for what we do, education and so on. So just to pick out a few of these various projects that are going on, the one that you mentioned is a really good one. It's the sealing archaeology. So this is looking particularly at fur sealing, and it was such a secretive industry. So, there were lots of ships going down in the 1800s, slaughtering the fur seals for their fur. But there is very few records, unlike the whaling industry, where we pretty much know exactly what was going on. But the fur sealing, there's very little record. So these old sites of this industry will tell us so much more about the industry, just the sheer quantity, the amount of effort that was going in on the materials they were using. And so with quite a little build-up, we actually had the first group of archaeologists down on the island on a sort of a proofing visit this last southern summer. The archaeologists were from Cambridge University, but it was a South Georgia Heritage Trust project working. We have a sister organisation also, Friends of South Georgia Island, who are based in the USA. And so really, really exciting. And they had some people along with them who were doing citizen science with them. And they're out on the beaches and they are exposing some of these things, and particularly in places where actually these sites are being damaged. And unless we record this history, actually, it'll be lost forever. Because, I love this, actually. But the fur seal population was, at one stage, thought pretty much to be extinct. They think a few animals survived on a small offshore island somewhere. And those animals bred back up. Once the sealing stopped, they bred back up. And they have been so successful at recolonizing the island. And they are so thick on the beaches, particularly during breeding time, that they are eroding the beach areas where the sealers were working. And so exposing these sealing sites, perhaps tripods where they used to boil down, elephant seal blubber and so on, try-works, so brickworks, even there's sections of boat. There's areas where the men were living, so they were exposing these wooden platforms where perhaps there might be a cave above, and they're finding hearths. They can see from the contents of these fires what the men were eating, what they were burning. Really, really fascinating. So this is an early point in the process. A lot of material was collected. It's now in the process of being analysed. And this is the first of several trips that will come down to look at the sites. There's a lot more sites we've not even found. There's some really significant sites that we haven't touched yet. So we foresee a project that will come back 2 and 3 times. Using a similar sort of pattern to what we did this time, using a small charter vessel to bring the archaeologists and other helpers in. So yeah, really exciting, and just sort of just in time type work because of the danger that this history would be entirely lost otherwise. So that's one. But yeah, so much more going on. So we were talking about the invasive plants and things, and tourists coming to the island are not necessarily the biggest risk to the island in terms of bringing in new invasive species, but they are part of the risk. And so, once you've gone to all these efforts to control invasive plants, to get rid of rodents, you need to be doing everything possible to ensure that nothing new is arriving at the island. So everyone's had to embrace that. It's made quite a big change for everyone, whether it's the museum bringing their cargo in at the beginning of the season, the checks that we undergo to make sure there's nothing in the boxes that could cause a problem. The tourist industry also really reacting very, very well, ensuring that boots are clean between sites, that we're not moving plants from one site to another. The ships are now, if they're going into the Falkland Islands, South Georgia Heritage Trust is supporting the dog work there. So there's biosecurity dogs based in the Falklands going on the ships, checking them to ensure not just necessarily only for whether they might have rodents on board, but they can also be trained to sniff out other things. So these same dogs could maybe look for plant materials or be repurposed in the Falklands to do their invasive plants and things as well. So that's an ongoing project that we're supporting that's really important to ensure the future of the work that's already gone in. But yes, so many more things that we're supporting. So there's been some super work with the whales around the island. It's a project being led by the British Antarctic Survey. We're supporting it. So they've done a couple of phases already. Last summer, they were down on the island while we were working there. So really great to see them using the little boats that we have based at King Edward Point. They'd actually had structures built onto the front of one of these boats, allowing them to go out, and they were looking to tag the southern right whales. And it was absolutely fascinating because on a day-to-day basis, we were able to report on the work that they were doing. Now, it was a funny old year for whales last year, so we would normally expect to see southern right whales in our coastal waters. However, last year, there weren't really very many southern right whales, but my goodness, there was a lot of humpback whales. So they obviously, just did whatever they could. So they were tagging these humpback whales, and then we could see where the whales were going. And this is work that's never been done. So we could see the whales heading out towards the South Sandwich Islands to feed down there, whilst another one was heading around the south of the island and was there for months. And it turns out that one of the tags that they put out is the longest running tag that's ever been put out on a whale. So they've been able to follow this whale as it then turns back up to, I think it's the Brazilian coast, to go probably back to its breeding ground. So, there is a lot being learned about the whale populations, and that team will be back again next season. They're going to charter a vessel and be based out at Seymour. So very happy to be supporting that. And of course, with whales, it's all about the recovery of the whale populations after the devastating effects of whaling and sealing in the waters around South Georgia. So, we have, having been on the island as long as I have, it's been wonderful to see the increase in whale populations during that time. Really amazing. I think one of the sightings for which is, an area known for the upwelling, so lots of rich food there, but just in numbers that are unprecedented in modern life. So I want to tell you about all our projects, but I think I'd take up like half a day. We've got an exciting an app coming, which is going to allow people coming down to the island to access up-to-the-minute information on the science that's going on, perhaps do some visualization of what life was like on the island years ago. It's going to be really exciting, very interactive. We've got a art project. The whaling station at Grytviken is centered around a place called the Plan, which was a wooden platform where a whale would be dismembered. And the Plan was removed during works years ago by the government to take away some of the hazards around the station so that people could visit the site. But it's such a focal point of the station that it's been a plan for SGHT to reinstate some structure there. But they're not just going to rebuild this wooden structure. They want it to have an element that perhaps celebrates the resurgence of life in the waters. And so this is going out as an art project, so they will put it open, invite artists to have their ideas of how this might work, what this might be. So that's coming in within a year or two. I think we will be into that process, and we literally don't know where that's going to go. But yeah, really, really nice to have something along those lines. You heard me say about the curator at the museum. Super steps forward for the museum. That's, obviously, it'll more than double the cost of running the museum down on the island, but really, really worthwhile. We've got a really substantial centenary coming that I don't think that many people will be marking. We've had a lot of these polar explorers sort of centenaries in recent years, of the great years of exploration down on the continent. But Shackleton, who has such a strong association with the island and is buried in the cemetery at Grytviken, he in 1921-22 sets out on another expedition on a vessel called the Quest. And when the Quest reaches Grytviken, she puts down anchor in the cove, and then Shackleton dies. And so, this is obviously so important to the history of the island, that we at the museum are going to mark that in a substantial way. So we're beginning to plan how we're going to do that, and we hope to be working with other institutions with exhibitions and things around that. So yeah, it's so much going on, and I'm sure I've missed half of it. We've got work with people assisting the bird life. Anyone who's visited the island will have been lucky to see some of the albatross species that are using the island to breed. But sadly, some of those species are in real trouble. Their populations are still declining, even in the absence of rodents that might have been impacting their breeding success in some places. So there's other things going on, and we think that the real problem is their interaction with the commercial fisheries in unregulated waters. So there's a whole project again that SGHT, FOSGI are supporting this work to work out where these interactions are happening, to work with the fishing industry working in those areas, to try to get them to do simple things that will stop them catching these birds, and hope to make a real difference to the population survival in South Georgia and in other places. So yeah, so much going on.
Mm-hmm. So much going on. Oh my goodness, Sarah, my head is spinning. But what I love about it as I listen to you speak is that this is proof positive that a small group of people can have a massive impact, right? Because there's not that many people involved in all of these various initiatives in the scheme of things. And it's not that they have special powers or special access to resources per se. It's that they're committed and they have the vision, and they look at something that looks or seems impossible, like getting rid of all the rodents, and they say, no, we're going to try it anyways. And look at this amazing success. Cataloging the whales. I mean, we had Ted Cheeseman on a couple of episodes ago talking about Happy Whale, which is also identifying whales, involved in tagging whales and that kind of thing to try to track their resurgence. And so there's just this handful of really dedicated, passionate people like yourself involved in these initiatives. And it's so inspiring to hear that it's not just getting rid of invasive species, it's tracking species that are rebounding, it's looking at the history and conserving the history and involving artists in the development of Grytviken itself. It's just, for such a tiny little place, there's so much happening, and it's really exciting. The marking of Shackleton's death, I'm sure, will be a huge draw for people who are big history buffs, and it's something they should probably be marking on their calendars if they've always wanted to go to South Georgia. That will be the year. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. It sounds like you all are insanely busy, and so, of course, my natural next question is, what do you and your staff, while you're there for the 6 months, what do you do in the wee bits of time off that you get?
Well, Heather, just what a special spot that is. Now, we're quite confined. Where we live is actually in the central section of the island, and you don't walk more than a day in any direction, and you've got a major glacier. So we don't cross those. You need really specialized skills to travel in areas like that. And we have to have some natural boundaries. As you say, we're in a remote spot. No one can fly to our rescue. So all of us living on the island, we sign up to the same list of limitations that are designed not only to keep ourselves as safe whilst allowing us to explore, also, of course, to try and enable the work, because if everyone's diverted off to help someone who's hurt themselves, that means no science is getting done, the boats aren't running, and so on. So, we just have to be a little bit sensible about living in a place like that. But, there is a lot to explore, and we can't reach, for instance, the major king penguin colonies that most tourist vessels will see. However, if you put the effort in and you walk for half a day, then you can reach a nice little Gentoo colony. We have a couple of little tiny groups of king penguins trying to nest in a couple of places we can get to. And if we get a couple of days off together, then we're really encouraging the staff to get out. Maybe there's a couple of old huts that used to be used for science, and they can go out and camp. If they go out, a couple of them or 2 or 3 of them can go out and camp in these huts and just maybe spend a night where you're so close to a glacier that you can hear the ice cracking all night long. And you just maybe are seeing a few more king penguins than we see. And we see wildlife even at Grytviken. But yeah, there's a lot for the staff to do, and that's what they're there for. With the exception myself and the curatorial staff, the others who are coming in, they want to access this island, and we give them as many opportunities as we can that as work allows to go and explore, whether it's walking. I had one mad staff member who was determined to have a little dip once a month, regardless of the weather. It's that sort of spirit that means that they're going to have had a really memorable time at South Georgia.
Yeah. Oh, that's really wonderful. Well, Sarah, where can people find out more about the South Georgia Heritage Trust, including openings for the fundraising assistant and all the rest of the great work that your organization and the Friends of South Georgia are doing to preserve and understand this majestic, amazing island?
Well, I would point them first at our website. So South Georgia Heritage Trust website, just Google it, will probably be the easiest way to find it. Or our Friends of South Georgia Island, our sister organization in the USA, has a website. There's also really, really good information in general about the island on the government's own website. So again, just Google South Georgia government. You'll come up on their website really, really quickly. There's lots of good books, of course. If people want to get some more background information, we have a little online gift shop, so you can order some of the key books for the island. But there's a lot of information out there. But watch out, because if you start dipping your toe, you'll realize you need to get there.
Yeah, especially as soon as you start seeing the photos, you're like, what on earth? How do I get there? Absolutely magic. Okay, well, thank you so very much, Sarah, for sharing your story and sharing your experiences on the island and all about the great initiatives that you're involved in. It's been wonderful speaking with you, and I hope this isn't the last time we have you on AntArctic Stories.
Oh, thank you, Heather. It's been really lovely, sitting in England to be thinking about my favourite place on earth.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of AntArctic Stories. If you like the stories we bring to you, please subscribe for future episodes. And if you want to help the podcast, leaving a rating or review greatly assists us in reaching a wider audience. AntArctic Stories is a production of Twin Tracks Expeditions, your experts in small ship expedition cruises to the Arctic and Antarctica. We love sharing our insider knowledge to help you find the perfect ship for your next polar expedition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or at twintracksexpeditions.com.